Much for that lovely introduction. I'm so excited always to do a repeat talk with what feels like familiar friends. So I'm going to start today with a story about my great grandmother who grew up in Mississippi and Louisiana. And she lived largely in a state of poverty. She was from a very poor family. She lived most of her life in a mobile home. She had many different stray dogs and cats around her always. She had a big family, many children, 7 children, and she lived to the ripe old age of 96, which for a person of her generation, born in the late 1800s, living again in a state of not great health care in Mississippi and Louisiana, was really a remarkable feat. And I'm going to be talking today about the art of aging, but I'm going to be returning at the end of today to actually talk specifically about my great grandmother and how we now know that empirical research in psychology helps explain how she was in fact able to live a very long life despite being born in less than ideal circumstances. But I want to start by talking about a very important topic, which is the stereotypes that we have about older people. And I'm going to be doing polls periodically throughout this presentation, which I like to do to kind of increase interactivity. So I'm going to start with a very first poll, which is, have you ever heard the stereotype that older people are feeble and absent-minded? So if you've heard that, write yes. And if you've not heard that, write no. And I will just give you a few, 10 seconds or so to get some responses in. This is anonymous. And I will then share with you your the views of people. And you guys are doing a great job. Over 70% of people have already put in their vote. And I'm going to give it just about another 5 seconds in the interest of time. We've now hit 79% of people participating, which is great. So if you want to get your vote in, I'm counting you down from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm going to end the poll. We just hit 82%. So great job getting in there. And as you can see here, this is a stereotype that many of us have heard about. So 91% of people on this poll have heard that stereotype. And I'm going to be talking today about that stereotype, about how it's wrong. And I'm going to be talking about the consequence of holding that stereotype that many people in certain cultures seem to hold. So before we get started talking about aging in particular, I want to give you a little background on something called mindset. And what we think about in terms of psychology is that mindset is basically how you think about yourself and how you think about the world around you. And we all have lots of different mindsets that we hold about, well, virtually everything. So many of us might, for example, have the belief that more expensive wines taste better. That's something that we may have heard about, we may have experienced. But what's fascinating is that because of this belief about the cost of wine predicting how good it tastes, researchers have found something fascinating. If you give people a glass of wine and you tell half of the people, this wine cost $40 a bottle. This is very expensive, very nice wine. And you tell other people who are drinking the exact same wine, this wine costs just $10 a bottle. This is very cheap wine. You give people the exact same bottle of wine, and in fact, if you tell them it costs $40, they think it tastes much better than if you tell them that it costs $10. So just telling people about the price of wine changes how you think about the flavor of wine. Here's another example. Many people might have heard the stereotype that some people are just naturally good at math. And some people, of course, are not. And here's the problem. As soon as you think that some people are good at math naturally, and that you're not one of them, guess what you stop trying in? Math. You get pretty confident that, well, I'm not good at math. Why should I even try? And sadly, as soon as you think you're not good at math and you stop trying, you actually get kind of bad at math because you're not trying. About 15 years ago, a new Barbie came out. And some of you might remember this, especially if you had children or grandchildren around that time. This was a very special Barbie because it could talk. And this was very exciting. So the Barbie came on the market, and the Barbie could say 4 different sentences. Here was one of the sentences. Math is hard. Now, can you imagine what a terrible idea it is to market a Barbie to young girls that says math is hard? So clearly, a lot of people had come up with that phrase, had seen this idea of the Barbie is going to say this, and no one thought it was a bad idea. Barbie is produced, Barbie comes out and says math is hard, and there was an outcry because lots and lots of parents were like, this is not a good thing for a Barbie to say in terms of girls' beliefs about math. But that's, again, another example of mindset. If you have a mindset that girls aren't good at math, it leads girls to feel that they can't be good at math and they're not going to try as hard at math. But the focus of my talk today is largely going to be about stereotypes that we hold that are wrong about aging and the consequences of that. So I started today with a poll, and I think the result was 91% of people had heard this stereotype that older people are feeble and absent-minded. And that is a stereotype that is very, very prevalent in many different cultures within the United States. It's a very prevalent stereotype. Now, I'm going to ask you to use your chat room for a minute. And what I want you to do is I want you to type in one word. And here's the word I want you to type in. I want you to think about what is the stereotype about aging that people have in many Asian cultures. So I want you to think now about China and Japan and Korea. What is the stereotype of what happens with age for people in Asian cultures? And I'm going to have you just type in a word or two, just a word or two or a phrase. And then I'm going to read some of the responses that people have put in the chat room to illustrate this point. And as you can see here, what are people saying? Revered, respected, honor, wise, wisdom. Again, look at this. All of those different phrases. Family, again, respect, valued, held in high regard. Look at all of those things that you all have just typed in. And that's extraordinarily important. Family, relevant, longevity. You guys are doing a great job of this. So here's why I'm doing this exercise. In certain cultures, the United States, we have a stereotype that older people are feeble and absent-minded. But this is not a stereotype that exists across the world. And that's really, really important to recognize, because that's going to be a theme that I have today about how we can change our mindset and actually experience greater happiness and even greater longevity. But I want us now turn to a little story. And this is how, as soon as we have a stereotype about something, a mindset, we interpret things that happen in light of that mindset. So I'm going to tell you a story about myself. About 10 years ago, I was scheduled to give a talk in New Jersey. I live in Massachusetts, and the talk was about 4 hours away from my house. The talk was on a Friday morning at 9 a.m. I had had a very busy day of teaching and grading and having meetings and so on. So I went home, I packed my suitcase, I had dinner with my family, and then I got in the car to drive to my talk. Again, that was at 9 a.m. on Friday morning. I did not get in my car to drive until 9 p.m. So I left later than I should have, and it was about a 4-hour drive. So because I was leaving so late, I decided I would just drive in clothes I was going to sleep in. So I got in the car wearing pajamas, a pair of sweatpants and a ratty t-shirt, wearing running shoes. So I get in the car, and at around 11 o'clock, my phone rings. It's my husband. And my husband says, do you know that you left your suitcase on the bed? And I said, I did not know that. Can you please call and figure out what is open in Princeton before 8 a.m. tomorrow? And he says, yes, I'll get right on that. So he hangs up and he calls me back in about 10 minutes and he has an answer. And let's see how you guys can guess. I'm going to have you, there is one answer, and I want you to try to guess, and in the chat room, the name of the store that he found that in fact was open. And I will see if anyone can guess. And the very first guess, Deb, in fact, guessed it correctly. A number of people are now guessing it was, in fact, Walmart. If you thought Target, that's too optimistic. It was not Target, it was Walmart. So in fact, it was Walmart. So I get to the hotel at 1 a.m. I get a wake-up call for 6. I drive to Walmart wearing my sweatpants that I had slept in, and I buy a complete outfit from the Miley Cyrus collection. I give my talk, and at lunch, I sit with the other people at the conference, and I confessed what a horrible day I had had and about my outfit at Walmart and whatever. And everybody laughed and thought it was so funny, absent-minded professor, can't remember her suitcase. But when it happened, I was about 40. And if it had happened when I was 65 or 70, people would have said, oh, senior moment, dementia, again, because we interpret things in light of our stereotype. And that's really the challenge of mindset, that mindset influences how we interpret people's behavior in ways that are potentially problematic. But we know that mindset influences us in lots and lots of different ways. We all know about the impact of, for example, the placebo effect. Researchers examining the influence of pain have compared how people report their pain reducing based on the cost of a drug. So we've all probably had that experience of, having a headache or a sore throat or the flu or a cough. And we drive to the local drugstore, and then we're faced with a choice. We can buy the more expensive name brand medicine, or we can buy the cheaper generic brand, CVS or Walgreens or, so on. So here's what's fascinating. Researchers have actually shown that drugs that cost more do in fact work better, but they work better only because you believe they cost more. That's the only benefit. In one study that was done at Duke University, they brought in people and they said, we are going to give you a small amount of pain, some heat applied to your arm. But before we apply the heat, we're going to put on some cooling gel to reduce the pain. Now, in all cases, they just put some lotion on people's arms, and it was the exact same lotion, and it was not lotion that would reduce pain. But for half of the people, they said, this lotion is very, very expensive. It costs $16 for each dose. For the other people, they said, this lotion is very, very cheap. It costs only 10 cents a dose. So people came in, they put this lotion on their arm. Half of them were told it's expensive. Half of them were told it's cheap. And then they applied some pain to these people's arms. Can you predict the findings? People who thought they were receiving a very expensive lotion reported that the pain was lower than people who received the cheap lotion. So that's an example about mindset, exactly the same as I talked about in terms of how much does a wine cost? You think more expensive wine tastes better. Here's another example, sickness. In this study, they measured people's level of happiness and optimism, which is a kind of mindset. How do you think about the world? Do good things tend to happen? And then, with the people's permission, they inserted a cold virus up their nostril. Then for the next 4 weeks, every day, they measured people's symptoms of a cold. They asked them to report, are you sneezing, coughing, runny nose, and so on. Every day, they collected saliva samples and they tested for antibodies to the cold in their saliva. Finally, in what my college students find really disgusting, they gathered the people's used tissues every night and weighed them to measure mucus production. Across every single measure, people who were more optimistic, people who had a happier mindset, were less likely to develop a cold, even when it had been directly inserted into their bodies. One more example. In a really remarkable study, this was done in Texas, researchers at a Veterans Administration hospital randomly assigned men to have one of 3 kinds of surgery. These were all men who were veterans, and they were men who were experiencing some knee pain. So the surgeons randomly assigned these men to one of 3 different groups. One set of men got actual orthoscopic knee surgery. Another set of men, the surgeons cut the knee open and scraped the cartilage and then sewed the knee back up. The third group of men, the surgeon cut the knee open and sewed it back up. All they did was create a scar. Now, the men did not know which of these 3 groups they were in, but when the researchers examined their recovery over the next 18 months, what they found, there were absolutely no differences. Men in all 3 groups reported feeling better, reported less pain in their knee, reported more flexibility and a better ability to move around in their daily lives. So men in all 3 groups, in fact, reported feeling better, even though one group of men only had a scar cut in their knee. Now, this is not to say that no one should have surgery and that surgery is just all in your mind. But what this study tells us is that feeling like you are going to feel better because you had an operation might in fact lead you to have more positive mindset about your recovery, and that in fact might lead you to feel better. Now, you're probably wondering, how in the world does that work? And that's a really important question. So in a really recent study, this one was done at Stanford University, researchers brought in people and they gave them a milkshake to drink. Now, everybody had the exact same milkshake, but half of the people were told, this milkshake is very, very high in calories. They gave them this, in fact, label that I'm showing you on your screen right now. They said this milkshake is called Indulgence. It is a dessert drink. It is high in fat and high in sugar and high in calories. So this is really a delicious ice cream milkshake. Now, other people were given the exact same drink, but they were told that this drink was very, very low in calories, that this, in fact, was a diet drink that was low in fat, low in sugar, low in calories, and it was guilt-free satisfaction. So everybody had this exact same milkshake, but people were told something different about what it was. Then the researchers measured a hormone in people's bodies that's called ghrelin. And this is a hormone that in fact cues hunger. And here's what they found. People who received the milkshake that they believed was a diet drink showed high levels of ghrelin. And what that means is that their bodies were saying, I'm hungry, I need to eat more. Because again, they were told they were only given this low-calorie diet milkshake. People who received the other milkshake, the milkshake that they were told was high in calories, they had low levels of ghrelin, meaning that their body was feeling like they were full. So this again is an example about how mindset might in fact change physiological properties in our body, including levels of hormones. Another study that was really remarkable also tells us something about how mindset might work. This study was done with women who had a job cleaning hotel rooms. So they assigned these women to be told one of two sets of things. Some of these women were told it's very, very important that you get regular exercise, that you need to exercise at least 3 to 4 times a week for at least 45 minutes a time. That is very important for your health. Now, other women were also told it's really important to exercise for your health. This is really beneficial. And also they were told cleaning hotel rooms counts as exercise. If you vacuum, if you change bed sheets, if you clean bathrooms, all of that is moving around and it counts as cardiovascular activity. So everyone is told you need to exercise, but some people are told, and what you're doing already cleaning hotel rooms counts as the exercise. The researchers then went back to these same women 4 weeks later, and here's what they found. Women who had been told, oh yes, exercising in fact is important and what you're doing cleaning hotel rooms counts. These women had lost weight, they had lower body fat, and they had lower blood pressure. So again, just believing that what you're doing, having a mindset that what you're doing in your job counts as exercise, led these women to actually lose weight, lose body fat, and have lower blood pressure. So it actually led to really important changes in their bodies. Now, I'm glad to talk at the end today, and I'm going to leave plenty of time, about 20 minutes for Q&A. So I'm glad to talk at the end about some different reasons why this might have happened. The researchers actually don't know, and I'd be glad to talk about different possibilities and hear your thoughts about what might explain this remarkable difference. Now, the title of my talk today, of course, is called The Art of Aging. So of course, I am going to talk about how mindset impacts aging. And mindset influences aging in a number of really important ways. Researchers in one study brought in older adults and had them read an article. In one of the conditions, the article was about how with aging comes natural decay in the brain, and people just can't remember as well. In the other condition, people read an article that said, with age comes wisdom and life experience. And in fact, that leads you to be able to remember things better because you have a wealth of life experience in which you can process new information. Then they gave everybody a memory test. As you can probably imagine, reading an article about how with age, your memory decreases led people to do worse on the memory test. People who received the positive article, in fact, did better on the memory test. That's an example about how memory impacts aging. In another study, they brought in college students and they primed them at a subliminal level, meaning below the level of consciousness, with cues of old age. So things like wrinkles and arthritis and gray hair. And what they found is that college students who were primed with words cueing old age actually at the end of the study walked slower down the hall to the elevator than did students who were not primed with these words. So just reminding people of cues of aging slows their walking speed. But most importantly for all of us, researchers in another study examined people's stereotypes about aging and then looked at cardiovascular problems that they experienced over the next 7 years, including stroke, heart attacks, and even congestive heart failure. As you can see in this diagram, people who had negative stereotypes about aging were much more likely to experience cardiovascular problems than people who held mostly positive stereotypes about aging. And remember, stereotypes are an example of mindset. I want to talk about one more really important study. And this is a study about how mindset impacts longevity. So in this study, they brought in adults ages 50 and older, and they had them complete measures of stereotypes that they held about aging. Things keep getting worse as I get older. As you get older, you get less useful. Then the researchers contacted these people every year for the next 23 years. And here's what they found. Adults with positive stereotypes about aging lived on average 7.5 years longer than people with negative stereotypes. So this study tells us that having negative stereotypes about aging is actually harmful. And we should be very, very mindful of trying to adopt more positive stereotypes, mindsets about the aging process. It actually can increase how long we live. I'm going to turn now to the second poll question, as I promised. And this is, I've talked about lots of different examples of mindset. And I want you to tell me, which of these findings did you find most surprising? And for this one, you can actually choose more than one answer. So one is telling someone their drink is high in calories, reduces feelings of hunger. Another choice is undergoing placebo surgery, that surgery about the knees can lead to less pain. Telling someone their work counts as exercise can lead to lower blood pressure. Priming someone with cues of old age can lead to slower walking, or holding positive stereotypes about aging can predict living longer. So I'm just going to keep this poll up there for a minute. And again, would love to see your responses. There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to see always what people find most interesting or intriguing. And you guys are doing a great job of participating. We've just hit 50% of people responding, which is great. And I will share the responses so you all can see what other people thought. And again, I am going to leave my email up at the end. If people have questions, we'll also do questions in the Q&A, and you will be receiving a copy of this slide deck if you'd like to refer back to it later on. And we've now hit over 70% of people participating in the poll, so that's great. In the interest of time, I do always want to make sure that we have time at the end for Q&A. So I'm going to leave it up for about 10 more seconds, and then I am going to pull the poll down. We've now hit 80% of people participating, so that's great. And I'm going to count you down. So if you want to get in your answers, this is the time, because I'm going to end it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we just hit 85%. So that's great. And here are the results. And so what's interesting is there were different answers for different people, but nearly half of you chose one of the first two, telling someone their drink is high in calories or undergoing placebo surgery. But lots of people also were surprised by the priming someone with cues of old age leads to slower walking. And then some people, about 30% of people were most surprised about the finding about someone telling someone their work counts as exercise, or about holding positive stereotypes about aging. So I'm now going to turn, and again, as promised, I am now going to turn to briefly talking about how mindset might impact longevity. And here's the answer. We don't actually know. So we can talk about this more in the Q&A, but there are different kinds of theories. One possibility is that having positive expectations about aging gives people a greater sense of control over their environment, and that belief in control actually is beneficial. One study that was done with patients who lived in a nursing home actually found that giving people a greater sense of control over their environment led them to live longer. So in one version of this study, half of the people were given a plant and they were told, here's a plant, the nurse will take care of it. It's just to keep your room looking pretty. Don't worry about it. The nurse is going to take care of it and water it and so on. Other people in this study were told, if you want a plant, pick the plant you want. And by the way, you have to take care of it. You have to water it. You have to make sure it gets enough sunlight, and so on. You have control of your plant. What the study found was that just giving people a plant and telling them they had control over it, they had to take care of it, actually led them to report better happiness and even longer life expectancy. So providing opportunities for people to have a greater sense of control and choice over their environment seems to be beneficial. Other research has shown that if you have positive stereotypes about aging and longevity, you might in fact have better health habits. Maybe you're less likely to smoke, or maybe you start eating healthier or exercising. Still, other research has shown that believing that with aging comes positive things, in fact, leads people to be less responsive to stress. There are lower levels of stress hormones in the brain, a stress hormone called cortisol, and in fact, lower levels of pulse and heart rate and blood pressure. So again, lower levels of stress probably leads to longer life expectancy. And so these are all some possible explanations about the benefits of mindset. I'm going to turn now, as I always do in my talks, I always end with a bunch of strategies. And I always end with a bunch of strategies because here's what I'm really hoping. I'm hoping you all have learned something, that you've been intellectually challenged and engaged in my talk. But what I'm really hoping is that everyone who's listening has learned something that they can use to implement in their life to feel happier, healthier, and even maybe live longer. So I'm giving you 10 different strategies because I'm really hoping that at least one of these is going to speak to each of you. One, change your stereotypes, that we all need to adopt positive stereotypes about aging. Here's a woman who ran the San Diego Rock and Roll Marathon when she was 93 years old. And there's a perfect example of someone who is in great physical shape. Again, with age can come great physical shape and great mental ability. Clint Eastwood directed a number of films, including Sully, including American Sniper, when he was in his 80s, including being nominated for Best Directing Oscars. So again, great experience. We can all probably think about the great wisdom that Supreme Court Justice RBG delivered even well into her 80s. So again, what we can do is think about stereotypes of people who are aging and showing great physical abilities, great mental abilities, great creativity. Two, exercising is tremendously important and anything counts. Exercising is good for the body but exercising is also really good for the mind. And this could be doing aerobics, it could be walking, it could be playing golf, it could be meditating, doing yoga. Again, it doesn't matter what it is, but exercising is really, really beneficial, not just for the body, but also for the mind. Research has shown that, in fact, exercising provides important stimulation for the brain in ways that help keep us more alert, regardless of age. I don't know if anyone here meditates, but there is fascinating research on the power of meditating for actually changing the brain in really important ways, stimulating more brain activity and actually even changing the structure and function of the brain. So if you don't already meditate, this is a great thing to pick up. It is cheap. It is easy. You can do it at home. You can get an app on your phone for it. And there's profound benefits of meditating. 4, keep learning. And one of the reasons why I was so excited when I was contacted by my health angels to do these talks is that, in fact, continuing to learn by hearing professors talk about things, Paris and movies and Lincoln and aging and psychology is a great way of continuing to keep learning. Taking classes is beneficial. Doing crossword puzzles is an example about keeping learning. And again, I think, in fact, my health angels found me through something called One Day University, where I also talk very regularly. And again, I love doing these talks because it's really important. And what we know from psychology is that keeping learning, no matter your age, is really, really important. Find some faith. And there is really interesting research about the link between religion and health and happiness. Here is some data that looks at the percentage of people who say they're very happy as a function of how often they attend religious services. And as what you can see here, people who attend religious services more often actually experience higher levels of happiness. And as you can see in the chart below, they also live longer. So people who never attend religious services live to about 75. People who attend religious services more than weekly, again, they're involved in their religious or spiritual community, live on average to about 83. And so this is really an important finding about the benefits of practicing religion. And I'm glad to talk in the Q&A about some potential explanations for these findings. 6, give. Giving is tremendously beneficial in terms of happiness and health. And it could be anything. You could give money or you could give time. Researchers in one study gave adults, and these were all adults who were 65 and older, who had been identified as having high blood pressure, hypertension. And they gave these people $120. And then they told them that they either had to spend $40 on themselves every week for 3 weeks, or to spend $40 on someone else. And this could be, you could give it to a friend, you could give it to a homeless person, you could donate it to charity. It didn't matter what it is. You could buy a gift for someone else or yourself, but you had to give it away. And then here's what they found. People who spent money on themselves didn't show any benefits, but people who spent money on someone else actually showed lower blood pressure by the end of the study. So giving to somebody else actually made people healthier. Another study, they looked at rates of volunteering in older adults living in California. And they then looked at survival among these same people 5 years later. Here's what they found. People who volunteered for 2 or more organizations were 44% less likely to have died during this follow-up period than people who did not volunteer at all. So volunteering in your community is an important way, again, of increasing longevity. 7, focus on positivity. I talked earlier about the benefits of a positive mindset. And when I return and talk to you all in May, I'm going to be talking about the science of happiness specifically. But what we know also is that positivity really matters. Here is a quote from a study that was done with nuns. And what they did is they looked at these nuns' diaries and they coded them for how much positivity there was. So here is one example. I was born on September 26, 1909, the eldest of 7 children, 5 girls and 2 boys. My candidate year was spent in the mother house, teaching chemistry and second year Latin at Notre Dame Institute. With God's grace, I intend to do my best for our order, for the spread of religion, and for my personal sanctification. So this is a quote from one of these nuns' diaries. Now, in the exact same study, here was another nun. God started my life off well by bestowing upon me a grace of inestimable value. The past year, which I have spent as a candidate studying at Notre Dame College, has been a very happy one. Now I look forward with eager joy to receiving the holy habit of Our Lady and to a life of union with love divine. So what you can see in those two quotes is that the bottom one is much more focused on positive emotion, grace, value, happy, eager joy. And here's what they found. Nuns who wrote more positive things, so these were nuns who were in the 3rd and 4th quartile, the happiest, were most likely to live to be in their 90s. They were dramatically more likely to live to be in their 90s than nuns who were less positive. And again, within the nun community, they're all religious. They all tended to practice happy, good health behaviors. And yet, even within this group of women who had this religious faith, women who were more focused on positivity actually lived longer. 8, get a dog and stare into its eyes. You all might remember, those of you who heard me in, I think it was January, talking about a study in which staring into your dog's eyes, your own dogs, not a stranger dog's, actually leads to a chemical of oxytocin that makes you feel better. Also makes your dog feel better. So pets can play an important role in happiness. And there's fascinating research suggesting that people who have dogs also live longer. So again, if you're an animal lover, there's some more good news. 9, spend time with positive people. This is a little bit of a complicated graph, but I'm just going to briefly show you it because what this graph shows is that spending time with people who are happy actually leads you to feel happier. So in other words, happiness spreads within a social network, and happiness is contagious. So spending time with happy people is beneficial in terms of increasing your happiness. And research has shown that people with a happy spouse also have better health and a 13% lower rate of mortality over an 8-year period. So again, happiness is important, and happiness within people in our social network also seems to pay off. Again, I'm glad to talk about the reasons for that in the Q&A. Finally, this is my last point, but it's the most important. Having good relationships. And this could be relationships with family members, with friends, with neighbors. But again, having built good relationships is really important. Here's a quote from the former Surgeon General. We evolved to depend on social connections, so much so that if we are feeling disconnected, that places us in a physiologic stress state. That state is as dangerous to our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And here is his chart showing the very best predictors of staying alive. And as you can see on this chart, the top 2 are about relationships, social integrations, feeling part of a network or a community, like you all are here with My Health Angels, a perfect example of social integration. Having close relationships, those 2 are more important than stopping smoking, stopping drinking, getting vaccinated from the flu, exercising, and so on. The 2 most important things we can do to live a long, happy, and healthy life: build good relationships within our family, friends, and community. And I'm going to end today with one more poll question. We've talked about lots of different things today, and I want to see which of these strategies do you find personally most useful. And again, scroll down so you can see the different answer choices. And again, what I'm hoping is that everyone found at least one of these strategies useful. And you can choose one, you can choose more than one. And again, I'll just give you about a minute or so, and then I will, and this is my last poll. And then I will share the responses. Again, I'm always hoping that people got affirmed for what they're already doing well, and they might have learned 1 or 2 things that they want to add. So you guys I really have the hang of this poll. I've already 50% of you have put in a response. So that's great. Oh, and we just hit 60%. So that's wonderful. And we just hit 70%. In the interest of time, again, I want to go to Q&A, which is always, frankly, my very favorite time. I'm going to give you 10 more seconds. And then I'm going to close the poll. We have now hit 80% of people, so that's great. And so if you want to get your answers in, again, I am going to share it with everyone. I'm going to give you 5 more seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. And I am going to end this poll. We just hit 85, so that's great. And here are the results. So I'm just going to scan down now. And so what's interesting is that 55% of you, that was the number one, said focus on positivity. And so for those of you who want to learn about focusing on positivity, I highly recommend the talk that I'm going to give you on the science of happiness in May. So stay tuned. I think there'll be an announcement about that at the end today. And I'm going to talk all about positivity in that one. Many people also thought keep learning. That was 51% of you thought that one. And again, you are here listening to me. And I know you have lots of super speakers about all different topics through my Health Angels, which is great. And then 42% of you thought exercise was really important and building good relationships. So those were the top highest. All right. I'm going to end now with where I started. And that is a picture of me. Can you figure out which one is me? So there's me, there's my mom, there's my mom's mom, and there's my great grandmother as I started the talk with today. And as I said, she grew up in a life of poverty, did not have a lot of money, did not have a lot of education, and lived in a state that was, pretty not well off in terms of healthcare. And yet she lived well into her 90s. And when I think about my great grandmother, who again, I had the good fortune to get to know throughout my high school experience, I think that so many of the lessons that we now know from psychology, she knew. She had a strong religious faith. She had great relationships with family members and friends. She had lots of pets, and she was always giving to people around her. And so I think of her so much when I'm giving this talk, because I'm hoping that I have absorbed some of her genes. But what I'm really hoping is that I have absorbed some of the lessons about how she lived her life in ways that let her live a long, happy, and healthy life, despite her circumstances. So thank you all so much for listening today. We're going to go to Q&A now, and I'm going to stop the share. A lot of this talk also came from my book, The Positive Shift, which looks at mastering mindset, the topic that I've talked about a lot today, and in particular, how it impacts happiness, again, which I'll talk about in the May talk more. But really for today's talk, a lot of this book focuses on both health and longevity. And so for people who are interested in learning more about the research studies, you can check that out. It's at independent bookstores. It's at Amazon. And for those of you who like Audible, I actually read the book aloud. So you can actually hear me read it aloud for people who prefer listening to it that way. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so people can look at each other more, but I'm going to just very quickly put my website address into the chat room because if anybody wanted to ask me a question, if we run out of time today, or if you are watching a video of this and you're not here live, it's absolutely fine to just reach out to me. My website is sandersonspeaking.com, and I'm glad to answer questions if you didn't remember a question to ask today, or if we run out of time. So thank you so much for listening. And are we going to do raise hands, or do you want me to go to the chat room? Let's
go to the chat first, because there's a couple of interesting comments and questions. Donna had a question when you were talking about the placebo surgery studies. She was wondering how they got approval for those studies.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's one people often ask. And so they got permission because the people who were in the study were told you might be having the actual surgery, or you might be in the placebo. So the people who were in the study had to be told you might get the actual surgery, or you might get a placebo surgery. Are you willing to be in this study? And they also told people that if they ended up in the placebo group, they would have the opportunity to have the actual surgery free, absolutely free later on. And so that was how it was allowed to be done. And that kind of research is always, very, very strictly regulated, so that people are told that they have it, that they might be in any of the conditions, and they can say, I want to be in this study, or no, I do not want to be in this study. And they are also always told that they will have the opportunity to have the actual surgery later on. It's actually the exact same way that we figured out the COVID vaccine worked, that you had people come in when we were testing out to figure out the COVID vaccines, and people were told, this is a vaccine study. You might get the actual COVID vaccine that we're trying to see if it works, or you might get a fake, a not effective vaccine. And if people were willing, they were then brought in and given one of these vaccines. And then in fact, people who were given the fake vaccine, the not effective vaccine, were given the opportunity later on to get actually vaccinated. So that's how like drug trials work in exactly the same way. Yeah, really important question. And I know that's always something that people are sort of like worried about the ethics of. So thank you for asking that. I'm sure a lot of people had that question. Thanks, Nicole.
Yeah. And well, I love Armand's comment. He just doesn't feel old. So that's great.
There you go.
There you go.
Then you're living it. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Yes, absolutely. And then Roxanne wrote in, a sense of control is so important in choosing diet, exercise, vitamins, and other things that benefit the body. We can choose life or death.
Oh, I love that. Oh, that's such a perfect example. And yeah, the power of control and knowing the things that we actually can exercise control over, that's just so very important. Thank you for that lovely comment. That's perfect.
And Luana wrote in, if an older person 75 plus changes and starts to have positive thoughts, can it still improve the attitude, health, memory, even though they are older?
Yeah, absolutely. Research has absolutely shown that that is true. And that's one of the things that's so exciting about this research, is that some of this research, and again, my time is always, limited here, but there's other research studies that have actually been done in which they bring in people who are in the early stages of dementia. And they find that even with people that are already showing some signs of memory loss, again, at a neurological level, that learning about positivity and doing things like taking square dancing lessons or photography or other sorts of ways in which they're continuing learning actually leads them to show improvement. So yeah, this is the information that I shared with you today can be used regardless of your age, regardless of your health circumstance. And there are real benefits to, again, shifting mindset. Yeah, it's never too late.
Yeah. Agree. And Phyllis wrote in, I wholeheartedly agree with volunteering. As a teacher for 47 years, I remain virtual tutoring high school students every Tuesday and Thursday. I'm 79 years old and remain prescription free. Good for you.
Yeah, well, and I bet that teaching was also really meaningful for you. And that's so wonderful that you're continuing to do that. I imagine that in the pandemic, your services have been particularly appreciated by so many. So thank you. Thank you.
Yes, that is amazing. And then, of course, there was a few people, diet, very important, positive Pat, very important, and exercise as well, but diet for sure with what we put in our body.
Yeah, absolutely. Really important. Yeah. And in fact, in my book, I talk specifically about chapter 7 is called The Secrets of the Centenarian. So people who've lived to 100, and what we know from studying people, again, I didn't get into the details in this talk, but what we know from studying people who've lived to 100 and beyond in particular parts of the world, Japan, Italy, and so on, is that many of these people are eating really healthy diets, lots of grains, olive oil, again, lots of vegetables. They're also, of course, building relationships, spending time outside. But yeah, that your intuition is exactly right in terms of the role of diet from Secrets of the Centenarians. Great example.
Yep. And Douglas wrote in, love is also very important.
Yes.
And yep. And Maxim, her grandmother lived to be 100 and she was always a positive person. So that definitely.
That's what we hear about from the nun study, right? I mean, from the nun study, that's exactly what we know, is that positivity really, really matters.
Yeah. And Sylvia, funny enough, her grandmother lived to 102 and she's dyslexic. So she figures she'll live to 120. So there you go.
I love that.
Yeah, and
love
I see Cynthia has her hand up, so if you want to unmute Cynthia, we can go ahead.
Yes, I was just going to bring up what you just brought up, the blue zones, which are where all the older people live. And I watched a show that said some of the same things, but one of the major things, eat plant-based diets, nuts, things like that. One of the things I thought was interesting was practice rituals every day that reduce stress. And then a big thing about it was having friends and having parents, family, living in a community really increased your ability to live longer. And my mother lived to 103. And, she was very much, she ate a certain way and all those things. And I took care of her the last 5 months of her life. And you can see why those things do work.
No, absolutely. And it's really a testament to what we know about the power of relationships, right? Like that living near people who care about you and who you care about is such an important part of happiness and health and longevity. Yeah, great example.
Yeah, and the Mediterranean diet is superior for health and wellness. Phyllis had wrote that in.
Yeah.
And Douglas, who's in a nursing home, he had an accident. He said that positive thoughts have saved him.
Yeah. Oh, I love to hear that. That's such an example. That's such a perfect example.
Yeah. And now, is there anyone that would like to ask anything, or anybody wants to, any other questions? Because all right, Donna, if you want to unmute. Hold on. Go ahead.
Yep, I unmuted.
Go ahead.
So I have a question about the study about faith, because to me, that sounds like a big part of the benefit of that was being in community, right? And the relationships piece, as opposed to spirituality or a belief or faith or something like that. And I have a hard time with the notion that atheists potentially don't live as long if they are humanists or whatever and have other deep values, but just not a relationship with God. Right? To me, that study is much more about community, because it was about how often you go, right, to be in a place together with other like-minded people who you know.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And in fact, you have actually hit on a bitter debate in the literature. And in fact, one school of thought is that you get the benefits from religion if you go. And so it's not really religion or spirituality, it's really being with people who care about you and care about, you care about. And therefore it's like support. And it's, when things go poorly, people bring you soup and, whatever. There's also another school of thought that doesn't disagree with what you said, but here's the school of thought, is that many religious beliefs are in fact about positivity. If I pray, someone's gonna hear me. God won't give me more to handle than I can handle. I'm going to see my loved ones in an afterlife. And so there's also a school of thought that religious and spiritual beliefs for many people are sort of a proxy measure of positivity. So you also do find evidence that people who have religious and spiritual beliefs, even if it's not associated with attending services, do in fact live longer. But you're certainly right that this does not mean that atheists don't live as long, or there are not other ways of finding community, et cetera. I think that your intuition about the value of the connection and the value of the positivity is really probably what's driving that effect. But for some people, that effect of belonging to a church group or a synagogue or a Bible study or whatever, for some people, that source of community is really how they're getting the relationships that's making them feel more connected. So I think that your intuition is exactly right.
All right. And Doug, I see your hand up. So hang on one second, Douglas, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for doing this. Fantastic. I'm a doctor of philosophy, specialized in spirituality and religion, and it saved my life a number of times. Now, when I got mad the other day and instead of hitting somebody, hit the wall and broke my finger. That showed me right there. You cannot get angry.
Mhm. Yeah.
Anger could cause a lot of real problems, and I have an anger problem I'm working on.
Well, yeah, and that's, I mean, that's a really great example. And I think somebody else had brought up the issue before about managing stress and, you know, doing things in your daily life that reduce stress. And what we know is that anger is very bad physiologically, right? Heart beating fast, you know, people who are type A, again, show lots of physiological reactivity, and that exerts a lot of wear and tear on the body. So yeah,
I should know better because I'm a doctor of philosophy with all these things, and I still have my challenges. I don't call them problems, challenges that still come along, even when you got all these different, you know, everything, and I got awards and everything, military hero and everything else, and then you still have these problems. I know we got to go with other people. It's amazing, you know. We have to learn so many things in life. I guess it's a learning experience still, no matter what.
well, thank
And
you for
the last thing I'll tell you is Socrates. They asked him why he was so smart. He said, "You all go around telling people how much you know. I tell you, I don't know anything." That's it. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Douglas.
I have a question.
Roxanne, yeah.
I would just like to make a comment, and I believe his name is Bernard Siegel or Saunders, wrote a book, Love, Medicine, and Miracles. He was an oncologist, and he basically said in his practice that, for oncologists, if they tell someone that they're going to live a certain amount of time, you have a year to live, usually within 1 year, they die. If they don't, if they give them a certain period of time, in other words, if a person believes a certain thing, they'll go along with it. They'll begin preparing for death and they'll die. And maybe we might have a loved one, like a parent that died at a certain age. So we believe we're going to die at that time because of genetics. And so we have to be really, really careful that we don't follow suit and allow, as you said, a mindset to be, I'm going to die at a certain point.
Yeah, I think that's such, I mean, that frankly is an example. I mean, it's an extreme example, but it's an example of what I talked about at the beginning today of, you know, if you have a stereotype that, you know, you're not going to be good at math, then you get not good at math. And so again, I think that's a perfect example and something indeed for us all to be very mindful of.
Yeah, I agree.
I have a question.
Yep. Yeah.
Hi, my face isn't up there, but I have a question. Hi. What is the science in how the body actually changes, like physiology or DNA or the brain, you know, that the neuro
Transmitters.
right, exactly, that sort of stuff. Is there a lot of science that shows that if you believe something physically, you'll change, and so it's easier to be there, experience it?
Yes. I mean, so that's, so now part of this, we're just kind of on the, I think the sort of forefront of really learning a lot of this stuff, but there is really interesting research being done right now. A lot of it's being done at Stanford. Some of it's being done in Boston at Mass General, in which they're really looking at how people's beliefs change hormone levels, neurotransmitter levels, in fact, parts of patterns of brain activation, and even the structure of the brain. And so, again, I think we're at the early stages of this, but what it's really telling us is that mindset, in fact, very much matters. We've all heard about the placebo effect before, but you can now look at the placebo effect in terms of how it operates on the brain, which means that people, when we think about the placebo effect, it's not just positive thinking. The power of the placebo effect is actually changing the particular parts of the brain in ways that reduce the experience of pain. So your intuition is exactly right that in fact, mindset seems to be changing us in fundamental ways at a physiological and neurological level. DNA, there's a little bit of research that in fact is suggesting that, but that research is very, very preliminary so far.
Thank you.